Hello, everyone. This is Chelsea Midlarski with RISE. For those of you who are RISE members and familiar with RISE, thank you for joining us today. For those of you not as familiar with RISE, we welcome you. For those, RISE stands for Rising Insurance Star Executives, and we are an organization devoted to growing, recognizing, and advancing the best young professional talent in the insurance industry. We were founded in 2016 to showcase the fun, innovative, and emerging aspects of the insurance field through our targeted networking events, interactive social media platforms, and technology-driven development webinars like the one you're on today. So today we have a very exciting webinar that we are co-sponsoring with Perrin Conferences. If you haven't heard of Perrin Conferences, they are an independent marketing and conference company that hosts large-scale national litigation events. Their goal is to educate, advocate, debate, and advance people in a balanced atmosphere of learning, networking, and sharing. We have chosen a phenomenal group of expert panelists for today's webinar on how to specialize in insurance. Both Perrin and RISE recognize that many new and young professionals sometimes wonder and seek guidance in becoming an expert in a particular line of insurance. This is why we have panelist Adena Edwards. Adena is the AVP of Environmental Claims for Starr Companies. We have Michael Aberle, who is the SVP of CannGen Insurance Services. We have Tom Gesner. He is the Complex Claims Unit Manager of Construction Defect for Liberty Mutual. And we have Anthony Dolce, who is the VP of Cyber for Chubb. And they're going to talk about their expertise and help you understand some of the many different lines of insurance. Before I pass it over to Tom, who's going to be our first panelist to speak, I want to let everyone know on the webinar that if you have questions, please wait until the end of the presentation. And at the very bottom of the screen, there's an option for you to type your questions in, and we will address as many as we can with the time that is permitted. So without further ado, Tom Gesner.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're at. My name's Tom Gesner. I'm with Liberty Mutual. I've been in the claims industry for about 30 years. Actually, it's more than 30 now. Handled a variety of different claims. Most of that has been in construction defect with both Golden Eagle and Liberty. Besides handling construction defect claims and managing the team, I've also been involved quite extensively with cross-functional project development amongst different organizations within Liberty, and have been a frequent speaker at both Perrin and CLM conferences, as well as West Coast Casualty. So when you ask what is construction defect, it really depends on the perspective of the organization that you're in. At Liberty Mutual, we define it slightly differently than the industry. And what it is, basically, we look at subcontractors, contractors, different trade professionals that are being alleged to have performed defective work that is causing damage in one way, form, or another to another building, the same building, a structure, or some area of property. The potential parties to a CD claim would be the property owner, the developer who's responsible for potentially developing a project, multifamily homes, apartment complexes, could be just about anything. We also look at the general contractor, the construction manager, subcontractors, and in these different roles, we look at upstream and downstream parties to specific contracts, and typically it's the upstream party that has the leverage over those downstream contractors. We also have product manufacturers, suppliers, and distributors that are involved in our CD claims. So when you think about what should you consider in handling CD claims, might be a good idea if the person that's interested is at least interested a little bit in construction or building something, has watched something, is intrigued in the building. Kind of a good idea to have an interest before kind of jumping in and deciding that construction defect claims handling is where you want to be. If you don't really like construction, it's probably not the right area for you. We really look at two different things: investigating liability and damages, as well as coverage. Construction defect claims often have a strong coverage component to it. So if you really like digging in, you really like to figure out facts and analysis based on different allegations, construction defect will really test your knowledge. So when you ask what are the advantages to handling CD, you will definitely develop quite a skill set. You will learn how the building trades function together, how they intertwine, and whether or not you really know much about CD. Everybody lives somewhere, hopefully in a building. And once you start digging into the allegations that involve defective construction, you kind of take a look at your own house and kind of pick apart what may or may not be wrong. And it may be what we call punch list items that could be a crack in the drywall that just is a separation crack or a shrinking crack, but not structural. What we'll do is look into contracts. Based on those contracts, who owes who what from a defense and indemnity perspective. You'll see tenders coming from various parties seeking defense and indemnity. We're continually challenged daily with different facts, different allegations, different components, but we still use the same policy. It's a CGL coverage form. There are some products that are out there for endorsing the policy, which either grants or limits the coverage. And by having all of this, all of the interplay between trades, you'll be learning about how those trades interact with one another and who's responsible for the work that was done before them or possibly after them. And what you'll find is in CD, really a cliquish group where everybody tends to know everybody in the larger communities. You'll arrive at a mediation, and if you've been to a few of them, after a while it gets to be like old home day. You'll see familiar faces from certain areas, you know, experts, lawyers, other case handlers that are familiar, and it's because it's a small niche industry. And these claims, they deal with continuous damage, so there's long tail exposure, typically over several policy periods where you have more than one carrier potentially involved in defending and indemnifying the insured. So how can you get started in CD? Well, if you're already in claims, look for any internal opportunities. If you have a commercial arm to your organization, then that would be the place to start looking. I would say talk to some people who are experienced CD case handlers. Ask them what some of their challenges are, some of the benefits. Inquire as to any potential mentoring programs that may be available either internally or externally. The construction risk and insurance specialist designation is also a good way to obtain a designation, which probably can be done relatively quickly, depending on how much effort you put in. But it's all web-based, all online, and I think there's 5 different phases of the training, which gives you a really good background to what construction defect and construction claims involve. And then search for any online webinar, seminar opportunities. With a quick Google search, you'll be able to find those. And consider attending a national CD conference where you would be able to actually sit in and listen to some of the different subject matters, a lot of trends in the jurisdictions that are happening. Some of these are free, some aren't. So I would say get to one that's close to where you are at and see if it's something that interests you. And that's it for me.
All right, thanks, Tom. We do have some questions that we're going to save to the end of the webinar. For our next panelist, we have Adena Edwards, the AVP of Environmental Claims for Starr Companies.
So, hi everyone, good morning or good afternoon, wherever you may be. My name is Adena Edwards. I oversee the Environmental Claims Department here at Starr. Just a little bit of background on myself. I think it actually will help to better understand where I came from, to understand how potentially you could break into the industry. I went to college for 4 years, graduated, got my law degree, and actually practiced law and worked in law firms for 11 years. I actually started out as a plaintiff's personal injury lawyer, which is a little different than most. And I spent 11 years working on the legal end of things. And then there was an opportunity at AIG. They were building out a whole new department and doing a whole reorganization. At the time, AIG had 8 different departments that did some sort of environmental claims. Each one did some aspect of it. And I ended up learning there and working in that program for approximately 2 years before moving over to the international side of the company. I spent some time there and then was at Zurich and now at Starr. Different companies categorize environmental claims differently, and that's kind of the key. There's no cookie cutter answer for what is environmental claims. Some of the companies that do have environmental claims groups have environmental claims that is solely the traditional, what you would think of as environmental. Now, what is that? There's a lot of different categories that fit into that. Some people think toxic, like exposure to toxic chemicals, inhalation exposures. You inhale a gas and you pass out, and is that a toxic tort type claim? Some people think asbestos is environmental. Some people think bacteria exposure, like Legionella type claims, that's environmental. Some people think mold fits into environmental. Then you also have other types of claims that are traditionally like GL type exposures, general liability exposures, lead paint cases, which have been traditionally general liability claims. Some people think that's environmental. Then there's the silica. Then you have also environmental spills, water and ground contamination. It's all over the place. So what exactly is environmental claims depends on the company you work for. Now at AIG, they broke it out into 8 different categories, and each one did something different. Environmental coverage is on different policy types across all different lines of business. You can actually have a policy for an auto policy that has a separate coverage on it for environmental. And depending on what company you're at, different companies handle them differently. So here at Starr, how we handle it is who wrote the business. So environmental claims at Starr actually involves multiple different policy types. We have contractors' pollution liability coverage. We have professional liability coverage, site pollution coverage. We have transportation and materials coverage. And we also write commercial general liability policies. Those are traditionally your bodily injury, property damage under, the normal circumstance of what you would see in either a construction type case or a primary casualty type situation. So we handle it all. Now, where environmental coverages arose out was on a commercial general liability policy. They started seeing all types of exposures to environmental risks, and they decided that that wasn't what they intended to cover on these commercial general liability policies, and they created the pollution exclusion, basically not providing coverage for those types of events because those weren't risks that they were prepared to underwrite. And out of that exclusion arose new coverages. Someone figured out, hey, we could start charging a lot of money for people that want that type of coverage. We don't want to cover it on the policies where we didn't intend it, but we do want to cover it on the policies where we priced properly for it. And out of those coverages arose, different types of claims. In my experience, where we've separated them out into different expertise, it's a little bit different. So you have departments that focus solely on environmental releases into the ground and the water and involve cleanup of that environmental release. Most people have seen like BP oil spill, or last generation was like the Exxon Valdez oil spill. People look at those and they think that's what environmental claims is. It is to some extent, but that's not all it is. We have certain releases that are considered an indoor toxic exposure. Depending on what jurisdiction you're in across the country, that could either fit into a commercial general liability type of coverage, or it could fit into a traditional environmental type coverage. It depends. So really the short answer is environmental claims is, depending on where you are, it's something different. So how do you break into this really complex, super diverse and broad area? Well, my experience is all over the place. I've had lots of different experience over the course of my career. I recommend getting as much experience as possible. Because the coverage and the claims themselves are super complex, it's very tough for someone fresh out of school to break into environmental claims. What I would recommend is to focus on a single area, like toxic type claims or general liability construction type claims. Learn that very, very well. Gain experience, learn how to read a policy. And then maybe move to a different area that would encompass something that's within environmental claims like asbestos. And learn that area really, really well. And develop and learn how to issue spot. The best thing you could possibly know is to know where the issues are. So if you can read, a claim submission and say, these are what the issues are, then you'll be able to better figure out, well, what type of coverage fits that? So I recommend getting a lot of experience, and not just single line experience, multiple lines, because to have just single line experience makes it very difficult when most companies now don't have training programs, don't actually isolate by individual lines. So the environmental claims that I did at AIG, that type of world rarely exists anymore. We are more in a world of the multiple coverage lines being handled by the environmental claims teams. I would say a majority of the companies, you're handling construction cases, construction defect cases, mold cases, silica cases, lead paint cases, true environmental cleanup, and that's all within the environmental claims team. I recommend going to seminars, CEs, and CLEs as much as possible. Learn what you can. There are a lot of free offerings now for if you work in an insurance company already. They allow insurance people to go for free. Perrin in particular is known for this, to go for free to seminars. Take as much learning experience as you possibly can. If you see someone in the industry that you want to emulate, that you want to get into their field, reach out. We're all in this a long time and willing to be a mentor to someone wanting to break in. Having a mentor that can help guide you and give you a path is a phenomenal way to break in. You can ask someone to shadow them. I have interns come with me to mediations every summer when we have summer interns. It's something interesting to see that you don't really get a flavor of it until you're involved. Back when I started AIG, we had 8 departments of about 100 people doing what now there's probably about 100 people industry-wide doing. So there's less availability of positions out there. You have to make yourself invaluable by gaining as much experience as possible. And that's the advice that I can give.
Thanks, Adena. We have some questions for you as well, so we're going to save them until the end. So for our third panelist, we have Tony Dolce, Vice President of Cyber at Chubb, and I'm going to let you take it away, Tony.
Thank you. Again, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are right now. I am the Vice President Cyber Lead at Chubb Claims. And so I have the responsibility for the cyber line of business on the claims side in the U.S. and Canada. And I'll get into talking a little bit about what it means to be to handle cyber type of claims in a few minutes. But I just wanted to give you a quick rundown of my background. I was in private practice as an attorney for several years, and then I've been with Chubb for the last 18 years. Actually, yesterday was my anniversary with Chubb, so I've been on the carrier side for a very long time, managing a number of lines of business, including errors and omissions, directors and officers, insurance, employment practices, media claims, and obviously cyber matters. I've handled a number of larger cyber claims over the years and involved big data breaches, things that you've read about probably or seen on TV, also things you've never heard of because they were kept pretty confidential. I found it to be very rewarding and very interesting. And so that was one of my takeaways, which was that I think the best advice I could give to someone starting out in this area, and I'd like to echo, I think, a number of the things that the two previous speakers said about, getting your feet wet and taking advantage of learning opportunities and trying to really understand coverage and things like that before you completely dive into a single line of business, is just to keep an open mind. And you never know where your next opportunity is going to lie. So you want to learn as much as possible in a number of different lines of business that interest you, obviously, so that when that opportunity comes along, you're able to take advantage of it fully. And so I echo the comments about taking advantage of things like seminars or different courses that you could take for either free or very little money, and just trying to explore whether or not you could shadow someone and really kind of see what the area is about before you commit yourself to diving in, because cyber, like the other areas that we were talking about on this call, is very specialized. And again, I didn't start out handling cyber claims. I started out managing and handling various E&O or error and omission type claims. So whether it was miscellaneous professional liability, where you insure any number of different types of professionals, or media, where you insure for content and you handle different types of copyright and invasion of privacy and trademark type cases. Usually people never start out in the area they end up in. And it's a little bit of a journey. And so I would advise to get yourself a solid background in insurance and claims handling, and then from there pivoting to a specialty where you really devote your time and learn it well. And in cyber anyway, there's different industry groups that grant certifications. There's one called the CIPP, which is a Certified Information Privacy Professional, and other types of industry certifications that let the market know that you're someone that has achieved a certain level of proficiency. And so again, I think it's just one of those things where at the core of it, you want to be able to understand a policy, and as the previous speakers mentioned, you want to be able to issue spot. And once you are proficient at doing that, I think you have a good foundation to go into whatever type of line of business that really interests you. But you really need to have a passion for it. And so with cyber, obviously, you want to have some type of an interest in technology, in privacy law, things like that. So if you really like things having to do with computers or IT, obviously that's a good fit. But I would say on the other side of the coin, you don't necessarily need to be some type of a computer whiz or a hacker or something like that to handle cyber claims. I think, you definitely need to have an affinity toward technology and things like that, because that's really at the heart of it. But you don't need to be able to take apart a computer and put it back together again in order to be successful at handling cyber matters. So if we can move on to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about cyber claims. And again, we have limited time here. I could talk all afternoon about cyber claims and how unique and interesting they are, because these are the cases you usually see on the news whenever there's a large data breach and people's credit card information or personal information is exposed, or you hear about some type of a hacking where someone got into somebody's system. And so what makes cyber unique is that it's a line of business that has multiple insuring agreements where it could trigger any one of sometimes 6 or 7 different insuring agreements on a policy. And when I say insuring agreements, I mean different ways that coverage would apply. And adding to the uniqueness in cyber is that under most cyber standalone policies, and that's what really where the market is going now, is standalone cyber policies for businesses that are both first-party and third-party oriented, meaning that there's first-party coverages that, just like your auto or homeowners policy, will cover you for a loss that you sustain as a business, whether it's some type of a cyber attack or a data breach or something along those lines. Sometimes even business interruption coverage is present on these policies, to third-party insuring agreements that cover things that you would normally expect on an insurance policy, like a claim or a lawsuit. Or sometimes you have situations where a first-party claim morphs into a third-party claim. So a data breach is how the claim starts, and then it ends up as a third-party claim because people start suing someone because their information was compromised. Or it morphs into a third-party regulatory matter where some type of governmental entity takes issue with how a claim was handled or how a data breach was handled. You have notification laws now for data breaches in all 50 states, and it's a real patchwork of requirements that need to be navigated, and that's why it's always good to have good counsel on a claim with you as well. So you really do need a variety of skills. You need to have both the good coverage analysis skills, like I mentioned earlier, to handle things like the third party and first party side, but you need also good litigation management skills for those lawsuits, and you also need to have that empathetic disposition to be a good first party handler, because many times you're dealing with people that are facing very traumatic situations. They're under a lot of stress. They're under a cyber attack. Their information's been compromised. And so, one of the recent trends is something called ransomware, where people's information gets locked up by a bad actor and they can't access their system unless they pay some type of ransom to them, usually in the form of some type of cryptocurrency like a Bitcoin. So it can be very stressful, and you really want to be that steady voice on the other end of the phone, helping them navigate through what can be a very trying time. So that's especially on the first party side. So that's cyber claims in a nutshell. And I'll wait until after to see if there's any questions on that.
Tony, do you want to talk about a little bit how to get into cyber claims specifically, or do you feel you
Sure. Well, sure. I think really it's like everyone else said. You really need to get involved into a claim department in a large carrier. That's really what you do. You may not just go there and say, hey, I want to handle cyber matters, but like what I did was you go in, you handle a different line of business, like something under a larger umbrella, like E&O, D&O, CGL, any of the bigger lines of business, and then you work your way over toward the hand, seeing if there's openings and things like that into the cyber area. Usually, you just don't go in like the two earlier speakers mentioned and just say, hey, I want to handle environmental, or hey, I want to handle construction defect. You usually move around after handling one of the larger areas. For me, anyway, that was handling error and omission claims.
Thank you so much, Tony. All right, for our last speaker, we have Mike Aberle. Mike is the SVP at CannGen Insurance Services. And I'm gonna move it over to the slide. And if Mike, you can take it away.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Like most cannabis people, I did forget my slides. It was such a, there's so much to talk about. I mean, where do you start, right? How do you instruct somebody to get into this industry where their mindset has always been set that this is bad, this is wrong, right? So let me give you a little history of myself. My name is Mike Aberle. I'm Senior Vice President and founder of the cannabis insurance for CannGen, the program that was developed. I wrote the original guidelines, the underwriting guidelines, the manuals, the forms I worked on, the application I wrote 100%, and essentially over those last 10 years, the program, I was just asked this the other day, has not really changed much from when I started. And I'll explain why in a moment. But over the last 10 years plus, I have managed one of the most successful cannabis programs, not only in the US, but now worldwide. I'm not from the insurance industry. I'm not from claims handling. I'm not from this industry in the financial sector at all, actually. Insurance was an afterthought. And then it became me. I love insurance. I fell in love with it because it was a constant puzzle, right? To give you an example of how I got into the cannabis, this will kind of give you some understanding of who I am and what maybe you're similar to this. So I got my original start, sold contractors like everybody else, and then eventually I realized, wait a minute, I didn't want to chase down leads, so I went after workers' compensation. Why? Nobody wanted to go after workers' comp. It was a hard job. It was difficult. It took time, right? I found a solution, which was essentially I didn't mind waiting for my commission. And that was the big part. Nobody wanted to wait for their commission. So I would take in 8 to 10 calls from my own office. That was one of my first success stories. I did very well. I did so well that 60% of my income every year after the first year was taken from that, just from workers' compensation alone on that direct bill. My second success within the insurance industry was bonds. I realized that nobody wanted to do them. They were no premium really to it. You really couldn't put a fee on it because it was so competitive. And at the time, California had not admitted. It was very struggling. Well, my office was a mile down the street from the CSLB. So I just would gather everyone's bonds up in the office. They would give it to me. I'd take it down, whether I made money in it or not, and I'd go turn them in. But while sitting in the line, I would meet 5 or 10 contractors who needed insurance and like, whoa, wait a minute, you showed up here? I don't have to do this? You would do it for me? Yeah, right? And then I would go out and flyer 30 to 80 of the trucks that were sitting in the parking lot every single day for about 3 years of my career, beginning of my career. So I always found a path, and my mentor, the owner's father, said to me one day, actually said it to the whole group as contractors were kind of dying out. And he said to me, and he says, all of us, he goes, never, ever leave insurance. It's recession proof. You just have to stay ahead of the curve. So now go out and find new business. Monday morning, I want to hear all about it. And that's where we came to insurance, cannabis. Over the weekend, I had gone to a funeral. I was out back smoking a joint with a friend of mine during that funeral, and I asked him where to get some of this stuff. I thought he had to go ask my guy, quote unquote. But he goes, no, there's a dispensary down the street. And I asked him what the hell the dispensary was. And he says it was a retail store for cannabis. They actually sell you legal marijuana as long as you have one of these cards. And he shows it to me. Fascinated by it. So fascinated by it, I went home that Saturday, wrote the beginning of an entire manual on insurance for cannabis, just the basic foundations, the basic understandings, the basic principles to it. And then Monday morning at 4 a.m., I was in there typing the rest of it up, end up presenting it at 6 a.m. before anybody showed up because he saw me in there. That's how I started the cannabis insurance. Now, how did we actually make it into an insurance policy where claims adjusters can agree and the attorneys can all agree on it? It was through the process of I sold my book back to the owner. I went out and he funded an entire year's worth of me physically working in the cannabis industry. Go work for a grower, go work for a manufacturer, go and work for a retail store, go work for all these industries and see what they do, see where the risk is over the next year, and then come back and we'll put it into order. Well, where am I going to go? And this is all the underground world. Where am I going to go? I mean, I knew where to buy it from, but I didn't know where it all began, right? Where it all started. So I realized during this time, it was the heyday of it, the big, what was it? It was trying to go for Prop 64, I think it was, or Prop 19, Prop 19. And it was the legalization, which didn't pass at the time. And essentially, I found out that they all had the same lobbyists. So instead of going door to door, I went straight to the lobbyist and said, hey, I'll pay you not to lobby for me, but to introduce me to every one of your clients. I need to understand the industry. Now, here's how we figured out the risk end of it for those risk managers that are potentially on this call, is we looked at it, what it was real. So when they were smoking with their employees, this is just one example, when they're smoking with their employees, we wanted to see that because that was the actual risk. We knew we weren't going to change the culture of an industry overnight, but we knew we needed to look at what the actual risk was and then charge for that actual risk. And then hopefully over time, we would develop the proper underwriting guidelines to kind of force them into a different way of life. But in the meantime, we would charge based on the risk exposure we were taking on. So that's how it all kind of started, is simply taking an idea and really throwing passion, like a couple of the panelists have said here. You know, it's the passion behind the idea, right? Where can you take it to? We never wanted to cut corners. As I got to know those people over the years, I knew these were my friends, so I needed to create a policy that actually provided coverage. So from day one, when I wrote the original Lloyd's program and then end up writing the Hanover Re program, it never had any exclusions to cannabis, hemp, CBD, marijuana, or the derivatives of, but we charged for it. But we can honestly look everyone in the face and say, you will not have a decline because of one of those reasons. The reasons might be because, well, you didn't have the proper alarm system because you chose not to. You didn't have the proper whatever, you lied on your application in other areas, but it wasn't going to be because you sold, manufactured, or distributed marijuana, cannabis, hemp, CBD, or the derivatives of. All of our competitors would always do that. And it was easy to point out, and that's how we just did everything right. So when you're looking at taking an idea, whether it's cannabis or cyber or environmental or any of the other ones, right? Take it and look at it. What can you do? What can you change to make it better, right? Where's the problem? What can I fix, right? And look at it as, you are a professional, right? You are a professional, and you need to be treated that. You need to treat your clients that way, and they look to you as people to have the answers. And I don't always have the answer, but I'll always tell them I don't have the right answer for that crop coverage or that workers' comp related to whatever new cannabis piece that comes out. But let me explore that. Let me find out, because they know I have the contacts to find out. And when I do come back, I'm not going to give them the standard retail broker answer that, everybody would give them. You give them the right, you give them what they're supposed to. So, benefits of specializing, you get to kind of create the landscape. You get to create, if you're specializing in something and you're ahead of the curve, you get to decide what the playing field looks like, right? And everybody else plays on your field. So you kind of get home field advantage at that point, and you kind of lead the charge as things go. And that's where I think the benefit of specializing has done well for me. What is it like to work in your area of expertise? You know what? It's awesome. It really is. But it is very, very stressful because you're dealing with legal issues that have not been worked out in the court systems. So you are reading every document that comes across your desk and not taking anything for granted because the legal aspects these people are dealing with. When you're talking about $100 million in property coverage or $200 million in property, and that's not all cannabis, but the real value is in the equipment in the building, not so much the cannabis under the roof. You better have your ducks in order. And a lot of the policies that are out there, right, have exclusions of cannabis. It could be under the health hazard exclusion standard on a liability, or it could be under the standard exclusions that deal with products completed operations, which you see all the time. So what is it like to work my area of expertise? It really is a fun industry, but at the same time, it is a lot of work because when you do specialize in something, you are setting the tone, you're breaking new ground, areas where there's no roadmap. So keep that in mind. How to pursue your specialty? My specialty simply is I've realized that insurance has come around full circle to where it's just a widget. If you look at cannabis, let's say, it's just a widget. The widget has risks like everything else. If you're talking about delivery, you're probably going to follow a pizza delivery type of a risk scenario. If you're looking at indoor growing cultivation, what's the difference between that and a tomato? The risks are still there. Electricity, water, employment, right? Those three factors still exist regardless of whatever the widget is, right? So just dig into it. And how do you pursue it? Find something you love and just go after it. I did. So with that being said, I'll hand it over.
Thank you so much, Mike. Thanks to all of our panelists. We have some time and we have some questions. So feel free to keep bringing some questions in to everyone that's on the call, but I'll start with some of the ones I have right now. The first question that I got, which can really go towards anyone who wants to address it, is I'm an insurance agent and have found interest in CD claims. So maybe this one's for Tom. Do you think that moving from sales to claims will be difficult?
As long as you have an interest and you enjoy the construction industry, I think that would be an easy transition because the general liability policy probably is one that you're really familiar with. And I would suggest tracking with one of the carrier representatives who handles CD in your area and try to get some more information, like we suggested about webinars, seminars, and even an in-person conference would be helpful. But I think that would be an easy career path to follow.
All right. My next question is to a couple people. It says, I'm considering pursuing a legal degree. Do you think having a legal degree will help me get into specialty claims?
I can answer that one. This is Adena. I think it helps. I really do. What you learn in law school is really an extension of a liberal arts education. It teaches a way of thinking. It doesn't teach you the law the way everyone thinks it does. You don't really learn that till you go out in the world and practice or actually apply what you've learned. Law school teaches a way of thinking that if you're looking to get into claims, it's the very same type of thinking that helps you to be better at handling claims. Now, there's another aspect of claims that you can't teach, but it's customer service. We're a service industry. So with respect to that, that's something that you learn over time. But is law school a good place to go to learn a way of thinking? Absolutely. It makes you a better writer. It makes you better at speaking. Makes you better at thinking in an analytical way.
Okay.
Is it necessary? No.
Well, actually, Adena, I have another question that just came in for you, and it says, as many states move to legalizing marijuana for various purposes, medical, recreational, do you think these emerging risks will be handled under environmental?
So the short answer is yes and no. It depends on what type of claim it is. It depends on who's writing the business that's covering the claim. So as I had said during my presentation, different companies handle things differently. So what would be considered environmental at one company may not be considered environmental at another company. Most companies these days consider environmental anything that the environmental underwriters write. So if they write coverage that provides coverage for either the growers or, you know, for their site pollution potential, then there may be potential there. Or for instance, if you're dealing with a real estate property where maybe you have multiple tenants on the property and people consume and use marijuana in a state where it's legal, and maybe they use the facilities, sink, toilets, what have you, and then there's a water contamination or underground potential contamination, that real estate property may have a claim, either first party or potentially even third party, by other tenants related to marijuana. So it really does depend. It depends on what the type of claim is. But yeah, it's something that we're looking at. In fact, I went on a seminar yesterday where we're discussing the possibility of these types of claims fitting into environmental down the road.
Okay, great.
Mike Aberle. I have a question. I want to make a statement on the environmental side. I absolutely do see a potential huge risk in the environmental claim side increasing, right, especially for the homeowners. And it's more on the side of the accusation that there's environmental issues and having a claim being covered during the initial process of a claim, because that's usually typically the most that we see a lot of our claims come in on. It doesn't go to full court most of the time. It's really them being accused of it and proving that they had no environmental issues. But there will be environmental issues as we go through these processes. Yeah. When you're talking about heavy metals, you're talking about contaminants, especially as you bring the cannabis growers from the hills into standard agricultural lands, and now they're next door to let's say a apple grower or a grape grower or a walnut grower, right? Especially here in California, where they're coming from the north and moving into the Patterson or the Central Valley area, right? So I definitely see that there's going to be environmental issues. And God forbid if an oil truck or some sort of vehicle tips over while having this product, you know, transporting it, and some of it, let's say, land in a creek. I don't know if there's really going to be a pollution, but I can certainly see that it will cause a hoopla on an environmental side, definitely. And I just see the environmental side definitely being an issue as you get into fires and other various different things that can be caused by the businesses themselves.
Just to take off on what Mike said about that, and I did touch on it a little bit, is as you make something legal, you add regulatory ability to it. So the more you regulate something, the more standardization there's going to be. And because of that, there's going to be quality issues. And I could foresee maybe policies down the road that would talk about contaminated cannabis, that if the growers use, you know, pesticides or other types of ways of growing and to aid in their growing, that it could be contaminated. And that could actually lead to claims. So it really leads to a whole other industry potential, both environmental claims and other lines of business as well.
All right, and this is the last question that we received. They asked, is there undergraduate degree that you should pursue in order to get into a specialty. So for example, maybe you would go into, construction undergraduate to go into CD. Would that be a recommendation?
No, I don't think you, that's my feeling anyway. My feeling is that undergrad is the place to really learn as much as you possibly can. I don't necessarily think that it helps to have a specific degree undergrad. I have an English degree. I think it has no bearing on where you end up. I don't think that it would necessarily, I don't think looking at a resume from someone that has not a science background would be somebody that I wouldn't look at. That's
I completely agree with that too. Yeah, this is Tony on the cyber side. I completely agree with that. I have a political science degree, all right, and I have a law degree, and I'm managing cyber claims for North America. So it really goes to, I would think you'd want to take that opportunity to really get a broad-based education and foundation. And then the next thing is to basically learn the fundamentals of insurance. And then, like we said before, if you have a passion for some subset of insurance or a line of business, then you pursue that and you get the necessary training and experience.
Okay. And I got one more question that just came in, and it's for Mike. It says, where is there the greatest need in cannabis for insurance professionals? Are underwriters, compliance professionals, producers, claims adjusters in demand? Where do you think the greatest demand / opportunity is for someone who has insurance experience interested in moving into cannabis insurance?
Well, I would say that you got to have cannabis experience of some sort. What can you bring? Because the insurance part, you got to understand, is the same. Whether I insure cannabis, because cannabis is really just an industry as it looks at, but you got cyber in there, you've got environmental in there. You've got to bring whatever you're going to, if you're an underwriter or you're a retail broker or you're a claims handler or you're a legal professional, whatever your expertise is or your love is, you apply it to cannabis. You got to understand the cannabis world, right? And you got to understand the do's and don'ts and how does it all work and what are the products and what are really the real risks involved in it. So I would say if you're trying to get into the cannabis industry, hone your professional side first, whether it's law or underwriting or claims handling or retail, whatever that's going to be, and then apply it to the cannabis or apply it to construction or apply it to whatever field you're going to get into. But that's how I would do it. I understood the cannabis people. They just made sense to me, right? When I sat down with them and they would talk, I got their problems, I understood their issues, and I understood how to communicate with them to get them to do what I needed them to do to write their policies, right? To have the carrier feel at least enough comfort zone for them to move forward. So if there's any need for it, all of it, whether you're an underwriter, there's plenty of needs. We just hired, I think, another 3 underwriters, right? Because we're expanding into 2 other countries. You're looking at claims handlers. Claim handlers are going to be an absolute necessity because the claims are going to come when it comes to environmental or IP issues, right? IPs are going to be the next big issue of dealing with them. There's just so many areas you can get into in the cannabis field. Just think of it, and that's where you can go.
Well, thank you guys for all these great questions. Thank you to our panelists for doing this webinar for us. If you didn't get a chance to get your questions answered, you can email the questions to hello@riseprofessionals.com, and we can pass that along to the panelists. Also, just want to mention that the RISE Awards are going on right now, and nominations are good through May 31st. So definitely get your awards in, and don't forget to come to the Perrin Environmental Risk and Litigation Conference on June 10th in New York City. For more information on that conference, please check out the Perrin and RISE websites, which is linked on the chat tab below. And thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful day.